Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is the next installment of this incredible series by Jack LaFountain, available for purchase now over on the Amazon website. Of course, I'll leave the link to that in the description box below. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Tracks IRAD Champion of ATALL, the Snow Season Story. Chapter 5. IRAD hoisted Jabal onto his back and set out for the Gitchigummy water in the land of the hay. Ada fell into a step behind him. The day was bitterly cold, and with a strong north wind rattling the bare maple and ash trees, the low clouds threatened more snow. The wolves loped easily through the trees on their flanks, keeping pace, but staying well beyond the reach of the clubs and the sudden charges. IRAD watched them from the edge of his eyes. He was not worried about being attacked again. Not yet. The wolves were wearing them down, pushing them. If they stopped to rest, the pack would close in and attack until they moved again. When the wolves thought him weakened enough, then they would attack. He had to find his family a good shelter that night, one that would be easily defended by one of them while the other slept. His eyes felt blasted and dry. He had slept little the night before. As the day wore on, his empty belly complained louder, and his legs were feeling the effect of struggling through the deep snow, powered by only his reserves. His muscles ached and cramped, but he pushed on. He knew that somewhere in their crafty minds, the wolves would notice a change in pace and know it for a sign of waning strength. A light snow fell, dusting his hair with a coat of white. He fought on through his own body, and Ada's laboured breathing told him that they should rest. He scanned continually, looking for a defensible place that they could stop. And from the way ahead and to his strong side came the deep, rumbling drone of the hay and their unliving animals, and he could see through the trees that the ground rose sharply and flattened. It was a black trail of the hay. He crouched to watch the trail and felt the wolves crowd in on them. The hay was still a long way off. The snow was almost gone over their trail. He and Ada could dash quickly across the black trail and into the wood unseen. Then they must rest. He relayed the plan to Ada and saw a weary, trusting acceptance on her face. She would go over first, Jabal on her back, and find a resting place. He would take the fight to the wolves long enough for her to find shelter before following her. He snapped a few small pines, broke them into pieces the size of his foot, and piled them up around him, gathering a few of the pieces and motioned for Ada to cross the trail. She jumped up and darted into the clearing. She was over the trail and into the woods in a few long strides. A wolf saw her go. It bolted around IRAD and broke for the road to give chase. He threw a stick that shattered against the tree just over the wolf's head, and it came to an abrupt halt. He threw another stick that chased it back from the trail, at least for the moment. IRAD scooped up the remaining broken pieces and charged towards the pack, slinging his thrown sticks at them as he went. The wolves retreated at a run into the safety of the woods. Pausing only long enough to reclaim his club, IRAD started his run to cross the hay trail. He stepped from the trees onto the black trail. A bellowing roar greeted him, and a wide, unliving animal much taller than he was bore down upon him. The creature's eyes shone brightly, even in the daylight. Its cry, like a giant goose, went speeding by him. He could see the wide eyes and open mouth of the hay inside the beast. The animal flew by him, just missing his foot, and he turned his head in time to see it speed away. The monstrous creature then crushed a wolf trying to cross the trail. It took a moment for him to recognize the beating. He he heard was not his heart, but Ada pounding out a signal that she had found shelter. And he hurried across the black trail, crashed through the trees, jumped a fallen pine, and sprinted toward the sound. He found Ada standing beside a small deadfall, Jabal tucked against the wall it formed between two pines. Ada rushed by him with an angry roar and a club high. IRAD pivoted around to face the pack. He shifted his club to a lesser hand and brought it down in front of a wolf trying to slip around him on that side. But the wolves retreated. While Ada stood guard, he uprooted a few trees to add to the deadfall. He bent saplings for a covering overhead, making the den more secure. That done, he motioned for Ada to join Jabal under the shelter. He would stand guard while she rested. The battle to hold his eyelids up continued through the night. It was as difficult as lifting a stone of ATALL. That stone he could put down. The fight against his weariness he could not. His world rested on his shoulders. Ada and Jabal would live or die on his strength. He lifted his head, stretched himself to his full height, and growled at the pack standing back in the trees, watching him. A mournful howl, not of his tongue, drifted over the woods as if in answer to his challenge. He saw the wolves stir and lift their voices in a chorus that stretched out in reply. And when the call ended, the wolves dipped their heads, turned their tails to him, and disappeared towards the sound of that far-off cry. IRAD shook his head, sending snow flying in a halo. The wolves were gone. He sniffed the air and walked out towards the place where they had stood. He could not smell them nor hear them. After the long pursuit, they had simply given up. He could think of only one reason they would do such a thing: easier game. Hope lifted him. If they had found game, he would too. He took shelter with his family and slept. Upon arising, he lifted Jabal to his back and started out, if not completely refreshed, then with a renewed spirit of power to lead them forward. It moved quickly over a series of hills while the sun arose, and then descended towards the treetops. The wind had carried the clouds away, leaving a gentle breeze and a blue sky behind. A harsh, sweet scent floating on the air stung his nose. IRAD knew the smell. It was the hay. Fire, they called it, when they sat beside it in the night. He had watched them feed it trees. He had also seen that fire jump up to eat the forest. He hoped it was not loose that time. He had neither strength to fight it nor flee. They must rest while the wolves were gone. They dug into a deep drift and lined the hollow with pine branches. It was cramp had sheltered them from the breeze, and was large enough for them to huddle together. IRAD left them in the nest and went to find the hay. It was good to know where they were and when they were in the woods. He followed the scent of the fire to the top of a hill. The fire cloud lay below, coming from the lodge, and he could see it rising to form a flat top in the valley before him. He moved down the hill using the trees as cover. The lodge was in a clearing. It was made of large trees woven together and sealed with mud. A pile of stones rested on one side of it. The fire cloud was coming out of the stones.
Did the fire eat rocks too?
The very large lodge with no cloud stood nearby. That lodge, it was a mystery. The hay liked to be close to fire, yet a fire cloud rose only from the small lodge. However, light, like that made of a fire, shone from inside the big lodge, and he watched, not moving, waiting for the small lodge and the stones to be eaten by the fire. But he saw no signs of it happening. Then a hay emerged from the small lodge, breaking IRAD's concentration. Bundled in furs, the hay moved along, a path worn in the snow, to the large lodge. He lifted a branch and pulled open the entrance. The scent from the opening made his stomach rumble.
I was true.
The hay stored food, and there was food inside. Its scent was unfamiliar, but it made his mouth water. The hay soon reappeared and returned to the small lodge. Knowing the hay did not like to move around much in the dark, IRAD settled into a crouch behind his tree and waited for the sun to go away. Pinpoints of light dotted the sky as it faded from bright to dark. The night had come at last. He rose from his place, stretched his arms and legs, and moved silently downhill. He found the entrance the hay used and lifted a thin branch that held it closed, and he opened it to reveal a shelter filled with sweet-smelling grass. An animal trap with a bunch of sticks made a low, bawling sound at him and stamped its feet. It was a big, noisy beast, and with an unfamiliar smell. He turned away from the moo toward the rapid clucking sounds he heard. There was the smell he was after. Birds in nests of smooth wood lined the wall. They made a racket with their cries, but they did not run from him. The necks of the clucks snapped easily, making them quick work. And the thought that he would feed his family that night spurred him on. He gathered an armload of birds, dashed from the lodge, and up the hill. At the top, he turned to look back. The wolf pack that had pursued them came from the woods to mill around the outside of the open lodge, and the trap moo must have seen them because it bellowed loudly. The hay's wolves inside the small lodge began yapping in warning. The hay burst outside. IRAD saw the stick in his hands. He stepped clear of the lodges and raised the stick towards the wolves. The killing stick thundered, and the wolves scattered and fled unharmed, while the hay loosed a trail of the harsh sounds of his tongue after them. He watched the hay go into the large lodge, where he could hear his faint cries from inside. A moment later, he came back into view and replaced the branch on the opening. However, the hay did not go back inside the small lodge. He seemed to look around at the ground between the lodges, as if he was searching for something. He kneeled in the snow, his hand moving, feeling something there. Suddenly, his head came up, and he looked up the hill directly towards where IRAD hid. The heart of the champion of ATALL jumped around and pounded within him. He knew that the hay had found his tracks in the snow, and he began walking towards him. IRAD made himself small behind a tree and did not move. He remained motionless until Ada's distress call jolted him from his place. He forgot the hay and bolted into the woods, making for their nest as fast as his legs would carry him, clucks in hand. Chapter 6. Ada stood at the entrance to their shelter, brandishing a club at the wolves snapping at her feet. They didn't hear him coming until it was too late. In dropping the birds, he seized the wolves by their necks and brought their skulls together with a crunch of splintering bone that echoed through the woods and brought the rest of the arriving pack to a halt. He turned on them, swinging the larger wolf like a club and flinging the other at the closest member of the pack. The body struck home, sending the living wolf tumbling back in a tangle with its dead companion. And when it finally regained its feet, it darted into the woods followed by the rest of the pack, and the battle was over. IRAD gathered up the birds and carried them into the shelter. Ada had been busy too. A pile of fat squirrels lay on the snow near Jabal's feet. They were out hunting when the wolves had found them. Ada managed to kill a wolf before retreating to the nest with its remaining companions on her heels. Her cry for help had brought the remainder of the pack, but they ate well that night. Ada, usually slow to try the new food, agreed the birds were delicious. After they had eaten, IRAD went out to retrieve the dead wolves. He piled them in front of the shelter as a warning for the others, though he did not think the rest of the pack was any longer a serious threat. He had a plan for the dead wolves. IRAD awoke to find the sky pale and light. He crawled out of the den and rose to shake the sleep away. It felt good to stretch his arms and legs. He was certain Ada and Jabal were safe from the wolves at that point. They were too few to try again. He called to her, and she soon appeared in the entrance, carrying the youngster and ready to follow him. And grabbing the dead wolves by their legs, they dragged them to the hill overlooking the hay lodges. The sun was above the trees when they got there, and the day held a promise of warmth. Melt dripped from the upper pine branches, and the snowpack was growing softer beneath his feet. They lay on the crest of the hill and looked down on the lodges. A fire cloud curled from the rocks, piled against the little lodge, but somehow the fire had not eaten them up. Nothing was moving around outside either of the shelters. taking Jabal on his back, IRAD led the way down the hill. When they reached the tree line, he pulled the head from a dead wolf and then from another. Ada did the same with her dead wolf, and taking a headless body by the hind legs, he rolled it over him and let it fly towards the large lodge. When all of the headless wolves lay in the open ground between the lodges, he picked up a head and threw it at the small shelter. It bounced across the top before rolling to the ground near the entrance. Ada threw hers too. It was a great sport, causing happy. They laughed and sprinted up the hill to take cover in the woods to watch what the hay would do. The hay soon appeared. He found the heads before wandering to the other side of his lodge to discover the bodies. Then the hay did a strange thing, even for the hay. He meandered to the edge of the clearing at the base of the hill and turned his face towards their hiding place. IRAD was sure he could not see them, yet he lifted his hand towards them and called out in a steady, gentle rhythm like a bird's song. When the song ended, he dropped his hands and returned to his small lodge. The call was so like a soothing song that it made them smile. They moved off towards the sun's rising, beginning a search for food. More hay shelters appeared the closer they came to the big water, until the lodges crowded out the woods. Squirrels and martins were abundant there. They found a secluded spot on a creek that flowed nearby. The ice was still thick, but easy enough to break. They drank the cold water and caught fish. And they were eating again, and that was enough, even if the fare was light. On their return to the den, they stopped at the top of the hill to look at the lodge of the hay, who sang to them. At the tree line, a tall pine that had been standing before lay on the ground. Maybe the hay wanted to make it into small pieces to feed to his fire. But what interested IRAD was the part of the tree still in the ground. On its flat top was a pile of round things with little stems sticking out of them. He tried to catch their scent but was too far away, and they turned towards the den. The moon washed the world outside their shelter with pale light. There was a mild breeze blowing from the north that carried none of the harsh cold of its brothers. IRAD left Ada and Jabal at their shelter and with a word of soon to return. The hay had left those things on the tree for them. He was sure. He had heard they did such things, but he was determined to move with caution. He'd seen their thunder sticks. Those could kill as surely as a blow from his strong hand, a club or a stone. But he had left the wolves as a gift for the hay. He did not feel this hay who sings like a bird wished him any harm. Still, he could not be sure, and so he would be careful instead. He lay atop of the hill, gazing down on the scene below. Whatever it was the hay left on the tree, well, they were still there. He saw no sign of him and moved closer. Nothing stirred in the area around the hay's lodges, and deciding he was not being watched, he walked to the waiting things on the tree. He picked a thing up and held it to his nose. The smell was sweet. It was food, firm with a shiny skin. He took a bite. The flesh was crisp and tasty, crunching between his teeth with all the sweetness the scent had promised. He scooped him into his arms, looked up at the small lodge and put them down again. There was light coming from the holes in the shelter. He decided he must go see while the fire did not eat the stones. The soft crunch of snow beneath his feet was the only sound he made. But as he drew closer, he could hear the haze wolves whimpering inside the lodge. And peering in through a hole, he saw the hay. The creature's wrappings were few, and he saw much of the body beneath. He had no hair except for the top of his head. The hair there was long, falling past the hay's tiny shoulders. His bare little arms could never lift the ATALL. They were so small. The hay lay with his head and shoulders raised and his feet stretched out on something unlike anything IRAD had ever seen. It must have been soft, like a bed of pine needles, for the hay seemed to sink down into it, bundled feet without toes sticking up into the air. And though the hay's mouth was not moving, he could hear the hay's words. He leaned closer, tilting his head to see further into the shelter, and jumped back, startled. There was a head of a hay without any smell, trapped in a tiny lodge. He was speaking hay words to the reclining hay.
Was it bleeding? Was the big hay saving the head of the little hay to eat?
He moved around the lodge to another one of the holes, and at last he had an answer about the fire. Fire ate only the trees fed into it, but did not eat the stones. The fire cloud escaped rising through a hole among the stones, and he could feel the warmth of the fire through the hole where he watched. He cautiously reached up to put his hand inside. His hand bumped against something with a thud. He quickly turned and ran into the woods.
There was ice in the holes.
He could feel the heat from the fire, but the ice, it did not melt. That was how those frail creatures live through the snow season. What other powers did they have? He grabbed his gift and left without pondering the question any further. Chapter 7. IRAD returned to the gift in place the next evening, leaving a pile of stones he collected from the nearby stream. He returned to the big hay lodge several times to gather birds, but they were soon gone. He wove through the woods and found many other hay lodges filled with birds and small animals. Some of the animals were babies of the great Myuu. Some of them had curly fur and said "bah" when they spoke. He took care to avoid the hay and their sticks that killed. The wolves, they did not. Neither did they escape IRAD's vow to see them all dead. He made a gift of the last of the wolves to the singing hay who had left him food. Meanwhile, Ada hunted in the woods, well away from the hay lodges. They were eaten again, and Jabal, where he was growing. The melting snowpack that had hidden the dens of martins, woodchucks, and ground squirrels was vanishing. The big water, the gitchy gummy remained frozen, but the ice on the streams gave way easily, and the fishing, it was good. The days grew longer, and the sun grew brighter, and IRAD knew the snow season was dying. The hay were moving from their lodges more, taking to their unliving animals and pushing deeper into the surrounding hills. The time to return home was rapidly nearing. IRAD went to the gifting tree one last time. He was no longer wary of the place or the hay who lived there. He paused only briefly at the top of the hill and started down to claim the food waiting there. He was near the bottom of the hill when he finally paid attention to the scent he had been ignoring. The hay was near, very near. IRAD stepped behind the shelter of a tall pine and froze. He looked out from his hiding place. The hay was there. He had not seen him the moment before, but he was there. IRAD waited, barely breathing. Then the hay began to sing. The sing-song spoke to something timeless inside of him. He peeked around the tree. The hay stood beside the gift tree, hands upraised. There was no killing stick, only the hay speaking to him in words he felt he almost knew. IRAD stepped from his hiding place and faced the hay. He answered the song in his own tongue and stepped forward to claim the gift left for him and replaced it with a handful of squirrel skins. The Sasquatch and the hay stood silently staring at one another for a long moment while something passed between them that required no words. The hay nodded his head. IRAD blew a sharp breath. They each turned and walked their separate ways. Wow, 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 wow. Certainly another one. Wow. What an absolutely beautiful story there. From the incredible Jack LaFountain. One more season in this book to come. Guys and girls, don't forget you can grab yourself a copy of Jack's incredible work over on his Amazon store, and I'll leave the link to that in the description box below. There you can grab such titles as Death Rides the Red, and of course, Bayou Moon. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR, and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you're an aspiring writer, want to get in touch with myself at the brand new email, which is contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's had a fantastic week at work or school and studying, whatever it is that you do. And I hope your friends and family are well and starting to enjoy a bright and warm summer. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.